I'm an associate here at Acuity Systems. Today what we'll cover is what are some of the things to keep in mind when hiring for top salespeople. So before we get started, what I want you to think about is I want you to think about the last sales hires you made in the last 18 months. And more specifically, I would like for you to think about the salespeople who are no longer with you. And I would like for you to think about why they're no longer with you. Why did they fail? Where did they struggle? Why did they struggle? As a sales manager, what are some of the things that we missed? How do we go about training this person? How do we go about coaching them? What was our onboarding process like when we brought in this person? What was our ramp-up time like? Did we have enough patience to bring that person to where they're able to go out there and make sales by themselves? What was our sales process like? How do we measure performance? And what were our expectations? And most importantly, what was our recruiting process and what was the recruiting criteria that we were looking for when we hired these people? You see, every time I ask these questions when I'm meeting with CEOs, presidents, business owners, I always get that deer in the headlights look. And they look at me and they say, well, sometimes we do this, sometimes we do that. Sometimes when we're hiring for salespeople, we're looking for this criteria. Sometimes we interview, sometimes we do phone interview. It just kind of depends. Right? So we find out that the recruiting process is very inconsistent. So to that note, if the recruiting process is very inconsistent, then of course we're going to get inconsistent results when we're hiring for salespeople. The second thing is what's the criteria that we're looking for when we're hiring for salespeople? When we sit down again and we have a conversation with the CEOs, presidents, and sometimes HR managers, and we have a conversation as far as what are you looking for when you're looking for salespeople, we always get the same thing as far as criteria goes. We always get people say, hey, well, I'm looking for somebody who's very aggressive, right? Somebody who's not afraid to go out there, knock on doors, make stuff happen. I want somebody with a positive attitude. I want somebody who, if they're in the office, they're very energetic, very positive. That just feeds off of the whole sales team. I want somebody who's confident. I want somebody who's not afraid to go out there and talk to the decision makers and get the deal closed. And on top of that, it's even better if they're good looking. It's nice if they have a good smile. So let's think about this criteria, right? If this is a criteria that we're looking for in salespeople, and we've been looking for this criteria for several years, then when it comes down to the sales interview, what do you think you'll get? You're going to get somebody who's very aggressive, somebody who's very confident, somebody who has a great positive attitude, and they might have a good smile. Reason for that is candidates know what you're looking for. So when you show up on the sales interview, they're going to give you exactly what you want to see. Then the second thing is just because I'm aggressive, just because I have a great positive attitude, and just because I'm confident does not mean that I can go out there and sell. Now, they're all great qualities to have, right? They're great qualities to have in salespeople, somebody who has a great positive attitude, somebody who has great confidence. But just because you have any of those qualities does not mean that you can go out there and close for business. So today I'll share with you some of the criteria that we look for in salespeople. The first thing that we look for is we look for somebody who has great desire. And not only desire, right? Desire says, I want to be successful. We want somebody who has great desire to be successful in sales. Sales is a tough career, right? It's the one career when you can feel on top of the world one day and not too good the second day. Right? So I want somebody who's willing to go through all of that and has high desire to be successful. The second thing, most important thing I look for is commitment. Now, commitment says I'm willing to do everything and anything it takes to be successful. That's commitment. Now, usually what we get when we hire salespeople, and you may be looking at your salespeople today and you may see some of this as well, is we get what we call conditional commitment. Now, conditional commitment says, I'm willing to do everything and anything it takes in order to be successful. As long as it's not too hard. As long as I don't have to change anything. As long as I agree with what you're telling me. Because if I don't agree with it, then what's the point of me doing it? And as long as I get to go home at 5 o'clock at night. Everything else but those things. That's conditional commitment. Now we want to get to the point in which we have somebody say, I'm willing to do everything and anything it takes in order to be successful, even if it's hard, even if I'm afraid, and even if I don't entirely agree with what you're telling me. That's commitment. Unless you're able to have those two things, desire and commitment, you do not have a strong salesperson. Why? You cannot get anybody to do anything unless they want it. No training in the world can do it. No great sales manager in the world can do it. No sales process in the world can do it. Only themselves can do it. And if they don't have those two things, it's not going to happen. Now, there are 5 major sales weaknesses that we look for in salespeople. Today, I'll cover the 3 most important ones. The first one is whether or not they have an unsupported buy cycle. A buy cycle is how you go about making a major purchasing decision for yourself. In other words, it's the way that you buy is the way that you sell. And there are 3 components that go along with a buy cycle. The first thing is whether or not they think it over. So to give you an example, let's pretend that you hired Bob. Bob has been with you a few months. He's going out there, getting appointments, getting in front of prospects, which is good. Now, when prospect says, hey, Bob, you've given me a lot of great information, I want to think it over. If Bob has an unsupportive buy cycle, and he is the type of person that when he's making a personal decision for himself, a personal purchasing decision for himself, and he's the type of person who goes out and thinks it over all the time. When Bob gets in front of a prospect and prospect says, hey, you know what, Bob, I want to think it over. I could teach 151 techniques to Bob on how to close more business, how to overcome that objection, how to go for the close, how to reverse the question, how to ask a different question. But none of those would work because the only thing that he would be thinking is, makes sense to me. That's what I would do. So the way that you buy has a 100% correlation to the way that you sell and the behavior that you accept from your prospects. The second component of this is whether they're comparison shoppers. So let's take Bob again. Right? If Bob's the type of person who, when he's making a major purchasing decision for himself, if he's the type of person to shop store to store to store, salesperson to salesperson to salesperson, brand to brand to brand, when Bob gets in front of the prospect and prospect says, hey, Bob, I want to be completely upfront with you. We're going to talk to you, and then we're going to talk to 3 other people. Bob's going to say, makes sense to me. That's what I would do. Okay. And then the third one, the third component, is whether or not they're price shoppers. So, for example, again, let's take Bob again. If Bob's always looking for the cheaper price when he's making a major purchasing decision for himself, and Bob gets in front of a prospect, and prospect says, hey, Bob, up front, I want to be completely honest with you. We're going to talk to you, and then I'm going to talk to 2 other people, and I'm going off of the cheapest price. The only thing that Bob's going to think is, makes sense to me. That's what I would do. Now, why is buy cycle such a big issue? Why is it such a challenge? Why is it such a weakness? Reason for that is people with a non-supportive buy cycle have extremely long sales cycles. They're the type of people who will come to you and say, hey, boss, I got another one. They're just looking for bids. Or I got another one as long as we're the cheaper price. Or I got another one, they're just thinking it over. And those responses just keeps making the sales cycle longer and longer and longer and longer. The longer that deal takes to close, the less likely it is to actually happen. So bicycle is a big one. The second sales weakness that I'm looking for is need for approval. Now, need for approval is the undying need to be liked, and in some severe cases, loved. Unfortunately, their high need to be liked or loved is much greater than their need to close for business. So let's take Bob again, for example. Bob has a high need for approval. Bob gets in front of a prospect. Prospect says, Bob, I gotta be honest with you. We have never seen anybody, a salesperson, do a great presentation how you just did. All these strategies you've set in place, all the ideas you've brought to the table, they're game changers. We definitely see ourselves doing business with you in the near future. Maybe never, but call me in 2 weeks. Now, at the end of that meeting, do you think Bob is upset at himself? Do you think he's mad that he didn't close the deal? No. He's thinking they love me. They love my presentation. They love our business. They're definitely going to do business with us. So people with a high need for approval will never go for the close. They're great at building relationships, very likable, people love them, but they will never ask a tough question. And what's the toughest question of them all? Will you buy from me? So people with a high need for approval have a hard time asking for business and closing deals. Then the third major sales weaknesses is what we call self-limiting beliefs. Self-limiting beliefs. Now, we all walk around having all these thoughts in our heads, right? All these scripts, all these beliefs that we have. And these beliefs either support or sabotage our success. In other words, is what we call head trash. Now, head trash is that little voice in your head that tells you what you can or can't do. So to give you some examples of what this may look like, is people with a high need for approval, they may walk around with the self-limiting belief of, I need people to like me. Well, that's not entirely true. And I'll much rather be respected first than liked second. They don't need to like you to do business. That's a self-limiting belief. People with a non-supportive bicycle, they may go around thinking, I need my prospects to think it over. Well, they don't need to think it over. Right? And we figured out that the longer they wait to think it over, the less likely we are as salespeople to actually take that to a close. Now, why is this important? It's important because you do what you believe. And in essence, your belief will become your reality. So if you have a lot of salespeople walking around thinking, hey, you know what? I can't call on a CEO or president, they never pick up the phone. Or I can never sell a deal that big. Then guess what's going to happen? They're never going to call on a CEO, and they're never going to close a big deal. So those are self-limiting beliefs. Now, when I started this session today, I started off by asking you some questions. And hopefully, as I was asking you these questions, it made you realize of a few things. It made you realize that, hey, maybe our recruiting process hasn't been that consistent. Or maybe it made you think about the criteria that we're looking for, right? Maybe we're looking for the wrong things. But then I also asked you some more specific questions, right? I asked you about management. I asked you about your expectations. I asked you about how did you measure performance? How did you go about holding the salesperson accountable? What was your onboarding process? The reason for that is hiring good salespeople is only one part of the puzzle. The second part you need to work on is what are those processes? How do we go about onboarding this person and making them successful? Because what you'll find is even good salespeople fail if they don't have the right processes in place to get to the success line. So I want to finish this up by asking you one last question. And again, think back the people that you hired 18 months ago, more specifically the ones who are no longer with you. And I want you to ask yourself, what could we have done different?
So if you have any questions in regards to how you go about finding your next sales superstar, then feel free to click on the link below. And thank you for watching.